In the annals of history, there are names that resonate with power and mystery, and among them, the Knights Templar stand as one of the most enigmatic and influential orders to ever exist. Their secrets, their wealth, their prowess in battle, all have been well documented over the centuries. Yet, there's an aspect of their history that remains hidden, a narrative deliberately erased from the pages of time: the role of women within the Templar Order. As we trace the rise and fall of the Templars, we often focus on the knights, the men who carried the swords and protected the treasures. But what of the women who were undeniably connected to the order? Could they have played a more significant role in the Templar legacy than we have been led to believe? And why, then, does history fail to recognize their contributions, their power, and the profound impact they may have had on the Order's enduring mysteries? These questions lie at the heart of the story we're about to uncover. The idea that the Templars, a secretive and powerful brotherhood, could have been guided or even shaped by the women in their ranks is a concept so often overlooked, it feels almost revolutionary. Yet, there are hints, fragments of evidence, that suggest women were deeply intertwined with the Templars' rise, their wealth, and possibly even the most sacred of their secrets. Through this documentary, we will explore the forgotten women of the Templars, their hidden roles, and the possible reasons why their history has been obscured. Was it deliberate? Did the Church, in its relentless desire for control, suppress the role of women in powerful institutions? Or is there something deeper, a hidden history that challenges everything we've been taught about the Templars? Imagine, for a moment, the Templars not just as knights, but as a more complex society, one in which women were not passive bystanders, but active participants in the shaping of history. Could there have been a group of women who not only supported the Templars' mission, but were entrusted with guarding the Order's most sacred mysteries, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself? And if so, why have these women been relegated to the shadows, their stories left untold? The mystery of the Templar women is not just about uncovering hidden figures. It is about reclaiming a lost narrative, one that questions our understanding of medieval power structures, the role of women in history, and the secrets that have been deliberately kept from us. As we delve deeper into this fascinating topic, we will uncover a forgotten legacy that, until now, has been buried beneath the weight of time and silence. This is the story of the lost daughters of the Templars, a story of hidden power, untold history, and secrets that have waited centuries to be revealed. And as we step into this forgotten world, we invite you to question what you think you know about one of history's most mysterious and powerful orders. The truth, as it turns out, may be far more extraordinary than we ever imagined. The history of the Knights Templar is a story of ambition, power, and mystery, a tale that spans centuries, yet remains tantalizingly incomplete. The Templars, founded in the early 12th century, began as a small group of knights with a singular mission: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But from these modest beginnings, the order rapidly expanded into one of the most influential military and financial powers in medieval Europe. Their swift rise was a combination of strategic alliances, royal patronage, and, most notably, their unwavering dedication to a cause shrouded in secrecy. The Templar Order, officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, was granted extraordinary privileges by the Catholic Church. Their status as a religious order gave them immense autonomy, and they were allowed to operate outside the traditional feudal system. This independence enabled them to accumulate vast wealth, land, and power. Templar Knights were entrusted with safeguarding not only physical treasures, but also the religious relics believed to be the foundation of their order's esoteric practices. As they gained prominence, the Templars became involved in the Crusades, those holy wars fought to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. It was during this period that the Templars began to acquire a reputation for their military prowess, fighting with a discipline and unity that set them apart from other factions. Their role in the Crusades, however, was not just limited to battle. The Templars also established a network of fortresses and commanderies across the Holy Land in Europe, which helped solidify their position as both religious and political power brokers. But it was not only their military accomplishments that defined the Templars. Over time, the order evolved into a formidable financial institution, with a complex network of assets stretching across Europe and the Holy Land. They became the medieval equivalent of bankers, offering loans and financial services to monarchs, nobles, and even the church itself. The Templars built a sophisticated system of communication and banking that allowed them to move money across vast distances, and their secretive operations only added to their mystique. This rapid accumulation of wealth, coupled with their enigmatic religious practices, led to rumors and conspiracy theories about the true nature of the order. At the height of their power, the Templars were a law unto themselves. Their members swore an oath of secrecy, and their activities were often hidden behind closed doors, fueling speculation about what the Templars were really doing behind the scenes. There were whispers of occult knowledge, sacred rituals, and a connection to ancient mysteries, most notably the Holy Grail. This air of secrecy, combined with their immense wealth and influence, made them both revered and feared. Yet, despite their power, the Templars were not immune to the tides of history. Their fall was as sudden as their rise. In the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France, burdened by debts to the order, sought to undermine their power. In 1307, he orchestrated a mass arrest of Templar knights, accusing them of heresy, blasphemy, and various other crimes. The charges were widely believed to be fabricated, part of a broader conspiracy to seize the order's wealth and land. In 1312, the Pope officially dissolved the Templar order under pressure from King Philip. The knights were disbanded, and many of their members were tortured and executed, their fates sealed by the treachery of powerful enemies. Despite their official dissolution, the legacy of the Templars did not fade away entirely. The mystery surrounding their wealth, their supposed connection to the Holy Grail, and the reasons behind their sudden fall have inspired generations of historians, conspiracy theorists, and treasure hunters. But there is one aspect of the Templar story that remains largely unexplored: the women who may have been connected to the order. While the Templars were predominantly a male-dominated institution, there are tantalizing clues suggesting that women may have played a more significant role in the order's history than previously thought. The order's rapid rise to power and its ties to secretive rituals suggest the possibility of hidden female figures, either as supporters or protectors of the Templar cause, whose stories have been lost to time. What role did women play in the Templar network? Were there women who held positions of influence, entrusted with guarding the order's most sacred knowledge? And why, despite their involvement, have they been erased from the historical narrative? These questions are crucial to understanding the full extent of the Templar Order's legacy, and they hint at the possibility of a hidden history, one that has remained shrouded in secrecy for centuries. As we continue to explore the Templar Order's rise, we will begin to piece together the untold stories of the women who may have been at the heart of this ancient brotherhood. Were they simply wives, daughters, or sisters left behind in shadows? Or were they key players in the Templars' most guarded secrets, their roles hidden deliberately by those who sought to suppress the truth? These are the mysteries that beckon, and it is only by unearthing them that we can truly understand the full scope of the Templar Order's legacy. To understand the forgotten women connected to the Templar Order, we must first step back into the world they inhabited, a world marked by strict boundaries, rigid hierarchies, and an unyielding social structure that dictated what women could and could not be. Medieval Europe was a place where power was concentrated in the hands of men, where women were often seen as secondary figures, their contributions overshadowed by the demands of war, politics, and religion. Yet beneath this surface, women played pivotal roles that history rarely celebrates. In the medieval period, a woman's identity was shaped primarily by her family and social class. Noble women held positions of relative privilege, often managing estates, overseeing finances, and navigating the intricate politics of alliances and marriages. Their roles, though limited by law and tradition, carried significant influence behind the scenes. They were the unseen architects of political relationships, the negotiators of peace, and sometimes the custodians of family secrets. Their literacy rates, especially among noble families, were higher than commonly assumed, allowing them to maintain correspondence, preserve records, and engage with religious or philosophical texts. On the other end of the social spectrum, peasant women bore the burden of daily survival. They worked alongside men in the fields, managed households, and contributed to local economies. Despite their labor being essential to medieval society, their voices were almost entirely absent from written history. These women lived in a world where their stories were often lost, overshadowed by kings, knights, and clergy. But among all these social divisions, one unifying force shaped medieval life more than any other: the Church. The Catholic Church wielded immense power over the daily existence of both men and women. It dictated morality, controlled education, and established the boundaries of acceptable behavior. For women in particular, the Church defined strict expectations: modesty, obedience, purity, while also limiting their access to positions of authority. Yet even within these constraints, women found ways to influence religious life. Many joined convents, becoming nuns, scholars, healers, or keepers of sacred texts. Some even rose to positions of leadership within monastic communities, demonstrating that the medieval world, while restrictive, was not entirely devoid of opportunities for female authority. Against this backdrop, the question arises: where did women fit within the world of the Knights Templar? The Templars were officially a male monastic military order. Their vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, reflected a rigid structure that appeared to exclude women entirely. And yet, history is rarely so simple. The Templars operated across vast territories, managed extensive properties, and built a complex financial system. Such an organization would have required far more than the efforts of its knights alone. It would have needed administrators, caretakers, patrons, and intermediaries, roles in which women often excelled. Noble women, especially those connected to influential families, frequently donated land, money, and resources to the Templars. These women had deep political and spiritual motivations, and some developed close ties with the order. Their patronage was essential to the Templars' rapid expansion. In return, the order offered protection, spiritual benefits, and financial security, creating a powerful network of alliances that extended far beyond mere charity. Moreover, there were women who lived near Templar commanderies, wives, daughters, sisters, servants, who inevitably became part of the order's daily operations. Some managed estates, while male relatives fought in the Crusades. Others served as guardians of property, keepers of records, or messengers. Though history seldom names them, their presence is undeniable, woven quietly into the fabric of Templar life. There is also the question of esoteric knowledge. Medieval Europe was full of hidden wisdom, some preserved orally through families or entrusted to select individuals. Women, especially those associated with noble or mystical traditions, could have been carriers of such knowledge. The Templars, with their fascination for ancient mysteries, sacred relics, and esoteric rituals, may well have relied on women for information passed down through generations. Some historians believe that the Templars had contact with female mystics, healers, and spiritual guides, a connection largely erased by the narratives of church chroniclers. Yet despite their influence, the medieval world was relentless in silencing the voices of women. Chroniclers, almost exclusively male, wrote histories that favored the deeds of kings, warriors, and clerics. Women, even those who played crucial roles behind the scenes, were often dismissed as unimportant or irrelevant. Their contributions became footnotes, their stories fragmented or forgotten. This erasure was not accidental. Powerful women, especially those with ties to secretive groups like the Templars, posed a challenge to the established order. By minimizing their presence, medieval institutions maintained control over the historical narrative. The absence of women in Templar history, therefore, is not evidence that they played no role, but rather a sign that their roles were deliberately obscured. Understanding the world in which Templar women existed allows us to reimagine their place in the story. No longer invisible figures, but women who navigated a restrictive society with intelligence, resilience, and influence. They lived in a world that rarely gave them credit, but their impact was nonetheless real. Their silence in written history does not reflect the truth of their existence. It reflects the powers that shaped the narrative. As we move deeper into the mysteries of the Templars, this context becomes essential. Only by understanding the constraints of medieval society and the hidden capabilities of the women who lived within it can we begin to uncover the forgotten story of the Templar women. Their legacy, though veiled, is waiting to be rediscovered, piece by piece, through the clues they left behind. If the official records are to be believed, the Knights Templar were a strictly male order, warrior monks bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But history, as we've already seen, is often written from a single perspective. It tells the version that institutions prefer, not necessarily the one that unfolded. And when we look closer, a more complex picture begins to emerge, one in which women were not only connected to the Templars, but may have played roles far more important than mainstream history has ever acknowledged. To uncover these women, we must read between the lines, searching for traces not in grand chronicles but in small details: land donations, household records, letters, forgotten testimonies, and the silences themselves. The question is not whether women interacted with the Templars. This is undeniable, but rather how deeply they were involved and why their presence has been so thoroughly obscured. One of the most revealing clues lies in the sheer scale of the Templar operation. The order held thousands of estates across Europe, each functioning like a small economic engine. These commanderies produced food, raised horses, managed laborers, oversaw finances, and maintained communications. It is impossible to imagine such a vast system functioning without the involvement of women. Even in medieval society, estates were often administered by noble women when the men were away on crusade. Some women became temporary stewards. Others remained lifelong administrators. Their names rarely appear in official documents, yet their responsibilities were considerable. There were also the women who lived in close proximity to Templar commanderies. They serve as caretakers, cooks, herbalists, laundresses, and midwives. Though these roles may seem mundane, they were essential to the daily survival of the order, especially during times of war when resources were stretched thin. Some of these women lived their entire lives under Templar patronage. Others married into families tied to the order, creating networks of loyalty and support that historians often overlook. But beyond everyday tasks, there were women whose connections to the Templars were far more personal and secretive. Whispered accounts speak of Sisters of the Temple, a vague term found in a handful of medieval records. These women were not official members, but they lived under the protection of the order and may have shared in its rituals, teachings, or spiritual practices. Some were widows of knights who had taken vows. Others were noble women who donated their estates to the Templars and thereafter remained part of the community. A few were even recorded as benefactors who joined the Templars on pilgrimages or journeys, an unusual departure from expected gender norms. There were also women tied to the Templars through family bloodlines. Many knights came from noble houses with influential women, mothers, sisters, daughters, who acted as protectors of lineage and property. When a man joined the Templars and transferred his wealth to the order, it was often women who negotiated, witnessed, or approved these transfers. This created a subtle but powerful bond. Many noble women became not just allies of the order, but guardians of its legacy. Through them, knowledge, documents, and treasures could pass invisibly from one generation to the next, outside the reach of kings or inquisitors. Some of the most compelling clues come from regions where the Templars operated in secrecy or collaborated with groups known for elevating the roles of women. The Cathars of southern France, for example, allowed women to serve as religious leaders, an idea that deeply threatened the Catholic Church. The Templars were known to have connections with the Cathars, and it is possible that their respect for women's spiritual authority influenced their own hidden practices. This raises the possibility that certain women may have held esoteric knowledge passed down through both groups, a form of sacred wisdom the Church later sought to suppress. Then there were the women associated with mystical or healing traditions. The medieval world was full of female healers, midwives, herbalists, and visionaries, some respected, others forced into secrecy. The Templars, known for their interest in ancient knowledge, may have turned to these women for healing, divination, or spiritual guidance. Some legends even suggest the Templars sought wisdom from women who inherited ancient traditions from the Holy Land, Jewish, Christian, or Islamic mystics who carried knowledge that predated the order itself. One persistent rumor in Templar lore is the existence of women who guarded sacred relics on behalf of the order. According to certain oral traditions in France, Portugal, and Scotland, Templar knights entrusted precious objects, manuscripts, relics, or Grail-related artifacts, to female custodians during the persecution of the order. These women, often family members of the knights, became hidden protectors of the Templar legacy, living quietly but carrying secrets of enormous importance. Their anonymity kept them safe and kept the relics from falling into the hands of the Church or the French crown. The erasure of these women from official history may have been intentional. During interrogations after the Templar arrest in 1307, the Church showed immense interest in uncovering the order's internal workings. Had the involvement of women come to light, it would have fueled accusations of heresy and immorality, charges already leveled at the Templars. It would have been in everyone's interest, especially the surviving knights and their allies, to conceal any connection to women. Thus the women disappear, not because they never existed, but because acknowledging them would have endangered lives. And yet, their traces remain. In forgotten property deeds, in cryptic references in trial transcripts, in regional legends about mysterious women who appeared after the Templar downfall, carrying chests of books or gold, in stories of widows who built churches in memory of fallen knights, in whispered genealogies claiming descent from Templar fathers and unknown mothers. These fragments form the outline of a hidden chapter in Templar history, a chapter in which women were more than spectators. They were guardians, administrators, mystics, allies, and perhaps even initiates into the deepest mysteries of the order. Their silence in the record is not absence, but a veil, one we are only now beginning to lift. Understanding who these women were allows us to see the Templars not as an isolated brotherhood, but as part of a wider world, one in which women played vital roles behind the scenes. Their stories, though obscured, form an essential part of the Templar legacy, revealing a hidden network that may have shaped the survival of the order long after its official destruction. To understand why the history of Templar women is so fragmented, we must confront a troubling reality. Much of what once existed about the Templars, especially anything that challenged the official narrative, was deliberately erased. The destruction of documents following the fall of the order was not a coincidence. It was a coordinated effort driven by fear, politics, and the church's need to control the story. And in that purge, the first casualties were often records that involved women, whose presence within a military and monastic order posed a direct threat to established religious norms. When King Philip IV of France moved against the Templars in 1307, one of his first commands was the seizure of all books, letters, and registries belonging to the order. These were locked away, burned, or hidden within the archives of church authorities. The Pope later ordered inquisitors across Europe to gather any written materials tied to the Templars. This massive confiscation was not just about suppressing their wealth or punishing their supposed heresies. It was about silencing them. The Templars had their own scribes, their own history, and their own internal structure. Controlling their documents meant controlling their story. Within this destruction, references to women would have been among the first targets. The Church had already accused the Templars of unorthodox practices, secret rituals, and contact with groups deemed heretical. Any evidence that women had a role within the order, even in non-ritual contexts, could have been twisted into proof of moral corruption. For this reason, records involving women were either suppressed by inquisitors or hidden by the Templars themselves. And so, a vast portion of their narrative simply vanished. Yet traces survived. Some appear in tax records, property deeds, or obscure letters found in noble archives. These small, almost accidental documents reveal details that official history tried to bury. For example, there are scattered references to domini connected to Templar estates, women who oversaw properties, administered finances, or served as legal witnesses. These women were often noble patrons or widows who had pledged land to the order. In several cases, they appear as stewards during times when Templar knights were absent. Though the Church minimized these mentions, they hint at much deeper involvement than traditional histories admit. There are also recorded instances of women being present at Templar-associated religious ceremonies or gatherings. Though these references are sparse, their very existence challenges the idea that the Templars were a fully sealed, male-only institution. Some of these mentions come from letters exchanged between noble families, where women speak of our brothers of the temple with familiarity and personal investment. These casual references suggest relationships built not only on faith, but on partnership, trust, and shared purpose. Beyond official documents, another important source lies in texts that never reached the hands of the Church. During the persecution of the Templars, many records were smuggled out of commanderies and entrusted to families loyal to the order. Some were hidden inside walls or buried in sealed chests. Others were copied into private manuscripts whose contents were disguised under religious commentary. These hidden manuscripts occasionally mention the Sisters of the Temple, a phrase that has puzzled historians for centuries. Were these literal sisters female relatives of Templar knights? Or were they something more, women who lived among the Templars or followed their teachings in ways that defied conventional categories? One of the most fascinating elements of this suppressed history involves the oral traditions that survived among certain families in France, Portugal, and Scotland. These stories speak of female guardians who protected Templar treasures during the persecutions. Some of these tales describe women carrying bundles of manuscripts wrapped in cloth, fleeing into forests or remote estates before royal soldiers arrived. Others tell of women who kept keys to secret rooms in Templar commanderies, safeguarding documents that may have held clues to the order's esoteric knowledge. These stories, passed down through generations, exist on the edge of myth, but their persistence suggests a seed of truth. Another layer of suppression stems from the fact that medieval chroniclers themselves were overwhelmingly biased against including women in historical narratives. Even when women played essential roles, scribes, typically monks, often ignored them. They focused instead on the deeds of kings, bishops, and knights. A woman might orchestrate a political alliance, negotiate peace, or save an entire estate from ruin, yet receive only a passing mention. If a Templar woman existed, even in a significant capacity, she would have been considered unworthy of chronicling within the standards of medieval historiography. Thus, erasure was built into the very culture that recorded history. The suppression becomes even more intriguing when we consider what the Templars were believed to possess. Many legends claim the order held ancient texts, scrolls discovered beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, writings that challenged Orthodox theology, or documents tied to the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. If these claims hold even a fraction of truth, the Church would have had every motive to eliminate or hide writings that threatened its authority. And if women were involved in preserving, interpreting, or passing down this knowledge, their names would be dangerous. Their very existence could imply lines of inheritance, spiritual or bloodline, that contradicted the Church's narrative. Some historians speculate that the most sensitive Templar documents may never have been written down at all, but entrusted orally to select individuals, possibly including women. In a world where written texts could be seized and burned, memory became a weapon. Women, especially those marginal enough to escape suspicion yet close enough to the order to carry information, would have been ideal custodians. If such oral traditions survived, they would likely surface only in the form of cryptic family legends or symbolic motifs passed down in art, embroidery, or local folklore. In recent decades, fragments of suppressed Templar material have resurfaced in unexpected places: private collections, monastery archives, and estates of old European families. Some of these contain subtle references to feminine figures associated with the Templars, cloaked in metaphor or allegory. Images of women holding books or keys, women standing beside Templar crosses, or women depicted as guardians of gates and towers appear in artwork commissioned during or shortly after the order's existence. Though easy to dismiss as symbolic, they may represent real individuals whose identities were intentionally disguised. The suppression of Templar women's history was not an accident. It was a deliberate erasure designed to protect political and religious power structures. But history, no matter how forcefully buried, leaves traces. In those traces, we begin to glimpse a hidden network of women who stood alongside the Templars, supported their mission, guarded their secrets, and preserved their knowledge when the world turned against them. Their stories were silenced, but not entirely lost. The fragments that remain guide us toward an alternative history, one where women were not merely observers, but essential participants in one of the most mysterious orders the world has ever known. Among the most enduring and enigmatic aspects of the Knights Templar is their association with the Holy Grail. For centuries, the Grail has captured the imagination of historians, mystics, and conspiracy theorists alike. It is considered one of the most sacred and elusive artifacts in Christian lore, a symbol of divine grace and the direct link to Christ's bloodline. But what if the Grail, as we know it, is not merely a relic of religious history, but something far more complex, a key to hidden knowledge that has been passed down through the ages, guarded by secret societies and perhaps even women? The connection between the Templars and the Grail is one of the most compelling mysteries in Western esoteric tradition. The Order's mission in the Holy Land, especially during the Crusades, was purportedly to protect sacred sites, safeguard pilgrims, and recover Christian relics. While the most famous Templar mission was the protection of Jerusalem and its Christian shrines, there are whispers that their true purpose lay in something far more profound: the guardianship of the Holy Grail. Medieval texts, particularly the Arthurian legends, associate the Grail with sacred knowledge and the continuation of a divine bloodline, traditions that challenge the conventional narrative of Christianity. In these stories, the Grail is not just a cup or vessel, but a symbol of a deeper spiritual inheritance. The Templars, known for their interest in esoteric wisdom and their secretive rites, are often depicted as the keepers of this ancient truth. But as with many aspects of Templar lore, the story of the Grail is not as simple as it first appears. It's a story entwined with women, both as carriers of the Grail's knowledge and as protectors of its legacy. One of the most enduring theories suggests that the Grail is tied to the bloodline of Jesus Christ, and through this bloodline, to Mary Magdalene. In recent decades, this theory has gained popularity, particularly after the publication of books like the Da Vinci Code, which proposes that Mary Magdalene was married to Jesus and bore his child. According to this theory, the descendants of this union became the hidden protectors of the Grail. While this claim has been controversial, it offers a compelling framework for understanding the role women may have played in the Grail's history. For the Templars, protecting the Grail, whether in a literal or symbolic sense, meant more than just guarding an artifact. It meant safeguarding a secret knowledge, a spiritual truth that threatened the foundations of established Christian doctrine. If the Grail indeed represented a bloodline tied to Christ and Mary Magdalene, then the implications were immense. It suggested a direct challenge to the notion of a celibate Christ, and by extension, the patriarchal authority of the Church. This secret knowledge would have been a powerful weapon, and the Templars were not the only ones interested in it. The Church itself would have been deeply invested in suppressing any narrative that suggested the Grail's true meaning. But what does this have to do with women? According to some interpretations, the Grail's protectors were not only male knights, but also women, descendants of Mary Magdalene, initiated into the sacred knowledge of the Grail and its true significance. These women, sometimes referred to as the guardians of the Grail, were said to be the keepers of the ancient truths associated with the bloodline of Christ. They held the knowledge of the Grail's true nature and passed it down through generations, often in secret. The role of women in guarding the Grail fits with the larger historical context of medieval society, where noble women often held the power to preserve family lines, inherit estates, and negotiate political alliances. In many ways, the Grail itself was more than just a physical artifact. It was a symbol of power, lineage, and the continuity of a sacred tradition. In this context, women, especially those of noble or royal blood, could easily have been the ones tasked with ensuring that this knowledge survived through periods of persecution and suppression. Several prominent historical figures are sometimes linked to this Grail tradition, many of whom were women. For instance, the medieval noble women who supported the Templar order financially and politically may have had deeper ties to the Grail's legacy than previously acknowledged. The idea that some of these women may have been descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene is a theory that has been explored in various esoteric texts and writings. These women were not only patrons of the order, but also protectors of a sacred heritage that extended far beyond mere material wealth. In addition to noble women, some of the most fascinating stories of female involvement in Grail-related mysteries come from the world of mysticism and spirituality. Throughout medieval history, there were women who were believed to have special insight into divine truths, and some of them were associated with secretive orders like the Templars. These women, often described as visionaries or mystics, were said to possess knowledge that was hidden from the public eye, knowledge related to the sacred feminine, the Grail, and the true nature of Christianity. One of the most famous women linked to the Grail legends is the 13th century French mystic and visionary, Marie de France. She was one of the earliest authors to write about the Grail in the context of Arthurian legend, and her work is believed to have been influenced by her own spiritual experiences. Marie de France was a well-respected figure in medieval literature, and her writings contain subtle references to the sacred feminine, the concept of divine wisdom, and the idea of hidden knowledge being passed down through generations of women. Her stories hint at a mystical, feminine side of the Grail that is rarely discussed in mainstream narratives. Similarly, the famous mystic Joan of Arc, who is not directly connected to the Templars, but whose life intersected with their rise and fall, also played a pivotal role in preserving the sacred traditions of the Grail. Joan's visions, believed by many to be divine revelations, connected her to the spiritual forces that were said to protect the Grail. Though she was executed by the Church, her legacy remains that of a woman who stood at the intersection of the sacred and the profane, guarding the secrets that the Templars were said to protect. Finally, the Templars themselves, although male, were deeply influenced by the mystical traditions of the East, particularly the Islamic world. The idea of a sacred feminine, a divine wisdom that transcends traditional masculine structures, was something that the Templars may have encountered during their time in the Holy Land. Islamic mysticism, especially the Sufi tradition, placed a great deal of emphasis on the feminine aspect of the divine, and this concept may have influenced the Templar worldview. Some esoteric traditions suggest that the Templars were not merely protecting physical relics, but were instead preserving a spiritual tradition that honored the sacred feminine, an aspect of the divine that was often suppressed by the Church. In the end, the connection between the Templars, the Grail, and women is one of the most profound and elusive mysteries in Western history. The Templars may have been more than just warriors. They were guardians of a hidden tradition, one that included women, both as protectors and as keepers of sacred knowledge. Whether the Grail was an actual artifact, a bloodline, or a symbol of spiritual truth, the role of women in its legacy remains a critical piece of the puzzle. Their involvement, though often obscured by history, was integral to the survival of the secrets that the Templars were sworn to protect. As we continue to explore the mysteries surrounding the Grail and the Templars, it becomes increasingly clear that the sacred feminine played a pivotal role in guarding the truth that has been hidden for centuries. The fall of the Templar Order in 1307 did not mark the end of its influence. In fact, it may have only been the beginning of a more profound and secretive chapter in its history. While many of the Order's knights were arrested, tortured, and executed, the legacy of the Templars did not disappear. It was preserved and protected, sometimes in the most unexpected of ways. One of the most compelling aspects of this post-Templar survival is the role played by women. Women who became the silent custodians of the Order's secrets, its bloodlines, and its continued influence across Europe. The idea of Templar bloodlines is one of the most fascinating and elusive concepts in the study of the Order. For many, the idea that the Templars were not merely warriors, but also custodians of a secret bloodline, has become a cornerstone of alternative history and conspiracy theory. The most widely known version of this theory posits that the Templars, or at least some factions within the Order, were the protectors of the bloodline of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. This bloodline, if it exists, was purportedly passed down through generations of descendants who were secretly protected by the Templars and their allies, both during and after the Crusades. However, the notion of a hidden Templar bloodline is not confined solely to the realm of fantastical theories. There is an intriguing historical context that suggests that the Templars, after their dissolution, would have needed to protect their heritage in order to maintain their power and influence. And it is here that women, far from being sidelined, played a pivotal role. In medieval Europe, women were often the key to preserving dynastic continuity, particularly in noble and royal families. Women were the guardians of inheritance, and through marriage, they ensured that bloodlines remained intact. This was particularly important during periods of political instability, such as the aftermath of the Templar arrests. When the Order was officially dismantled, many of its members lost their lives, but the lands, wealth, and secrets of the Templars did not simply vanish. These assets were transferred into the hands of families loyal to the Order, many of whom were tied to Templar knights through marriage. It was often the women of these families who became the primary custodians of Templar estates and the valuable documents and artifacts that came with them. When the knights were gone, it was their wives, daughters, and sisters who took on the responsibility of preserving their legacies. Many noble women were granted stewardship over these lands, some acting as de facto heads of the family. In this role, they maintained the family's ties to the Templars, ensuring that the order's secrets were kept alive in the shadow of official persecution. One of the most well-documented examples of this is found in the records of the Knights Hospitaller, the order that succeeded the Templars after their dissolution. After the Templar Order was officially disbanded by Pope Clement V, many of the surviving Templars joined the Hospitallers, a military order that was recognized by the Church. However, it was not just the knights who retained their influence in the post-Temple world. Several noble families that had ties to the Templars through marriage continued to act as stewards of Templar wealth and knowledge. The women in these families, often overlooked by historians, played a critical role in this transition, preserving not only the material assets, but also the esoteric knowledge associated with the Templars. In certain cases, women are said to have been entrusted with the key to the Templars' most sacred secrets, the knowledge of the Grail, the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and the ancient wisdom that the order had preserved during their time in the Holy Land. These women, who were either related to prominent Templars or were married into Templar-associated families, became the protectors of a hidden legacy that could not be revealed without risking persecution. They held the power to pass on this knowledge to future generations, but only in secrecy. The families that inherited Templar wealth and knowledge often continued to operate in the shadows, maintaining close ties with other secret societies that flourished after the fall of the Templars. Some of these families were rumored to have links to the Rosicrucians, an esoteric group that emerged in the 17th century with a profound interest in alchemy, spiritual knowledge, and the ancient mysteries of the Templars. Other families became associated with the Freemasons, a fraternal order that, like the Rosicrucians, was believed to have inherited the Templars' hidden teachings. In some cases, the transfer of Templar knowledge was said to have passed through female descendants of the original Templar Knights. These women, often from royal or noble lineages, were said to have maintained the hidden history of the order, preserving it within their families until such time as it would be safe to reveal the secrets to the wider world. One such example is the Merovingian bloodline, which has been linked to the descendants of Christ in various esoteric traditions. According to certain theories, the Merovingians were direct descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and their bloodline was safeguarded by the Templars. Some legends suggest that the Merovingian women, particularly those of noble blood, were tasked with safeguarding the sacred knowledge of the Grail and ensuring the continuity of the bloodline. These women, like their male counterparts, were rumored to be initiates in the ancient mysteries that the Templars had preserved. The fact that the Merovingians were seen as the legitimate rulers of France during the early medieval period only adds to the mystique surrounding their role in the Templar story. They were not merely passive bystanders to history. They were active participants in the spiritual and political struggles that defined the fate of the Templars. One particularly compelling theory is that women were the key to understanding the hidden Templar knowledge, which had been passed down through generations. These women, many of whom were noble or royal, held the keys to the ancient manuscripts, scrolls, and relics that the Templars had secretly safeguarded. They ensured that these treasures remained hidden, often passing them down from mother to daughter, or to trusted female allies who could be counted on to keep the knowledge safe until it could be revealed at a later time. As the centuries passed, the role of women in the protection of Templar secrets remained crucial. Some researchers suggest that the Templar legacy continued to influence major historical events, but that the women who carried this knowledge remained anonymous, often hidden in plain sight. They were not always the famous figures in history, but they were the silent warriors who maintained the sacred continuity of the Order's mission. The Templars, though dispersed and persecuted, found a way to endure, not just through their male knights, but through the women who carried their legacy forward. These women were the unseen custodians, the quiet protectors of the Order's greatest secrets. And though their roles were often overlooked, their importance cannot be underestimated. It is through their careful preservation of Templar knowledge and their discreet involvement in the survival of the Order's legacy that much of the hidden history we now seek to uncover has been passed down to us. The continuity of the Templar bloodlines, both literal and metaphorical, speaks to the power of the feminine in safeguarding history's most precious secrets. The women who protected this legacy did so with the quiet strength that defined their roles, ensuring that the Templar story would never be entirely erased, no matter how hard the forces of repression tried to conceal it. Throughout history, the Templars have been associated with an array of symbols, many of which have remained enigmatic and open to interpretation. Some of these symbols are widely recognized, such as the iconic red cross worn by knights. But there are also more subtle, hidden symbols embedded in art, architecture, and even popular culture. What is particularly intriguing is how women, often overlooked in the historical narrative, are subtly present within Templar symbolism. These hidden depictions in medieval art, manuscripts, and architectural motifs suggest that women may have played a more central role in the Order's story than is commonly acknowledged. Art has long served as a medium for conveying ideas, ideologies, and hidden messages. In the case of the Templars, artwork from the medieval period often carried dual meanings, one that was intended for public consumption and another that spoke to initiates or those with the right knowledge. These works, whether they were illuminated manuscripts, stained glass windows, or frescoes, contained layers of meaning. And within these layers, we can sometimes find subtle references to women, guardians of the sacred knowledge, spiritual protectors, and figures associated with the esoteric traditions of the Templar Order. One of the most notable symbols often connected with the Templars is the rose. While the rose itself is a common motif in medieval Christian symbolism, it carries special significance when examined through the lens of the Templars and their hidden teachings. In many of the Templar-related artworks, the rose appears alongside other symbols of the sacred feminine, such as the chalice, the feminine triangle, and the goddess figures. The rose, often associated with the Virgin Mary, can also be seen as a symbol of the divine feminine, linked to the hidden wisdom that the Templars were believed to protect. In Templar symbolism, the rose is sometimes depicted as a hidden key, a subtle representation of the guarded secrets that only initiates or certain bloodlines could access. It has been suggested that the Templars used the image of the rose not only as an outward symbol of their Christian faith, but also as a metaphor for the sacred feminine. The idea that true wisdom, enlightenment, and divine grace could only be achieved by embracing both the masculine and feminine aspects of spiritual knowledge. Women, in this context, were seen as bearers of this divine wisdom, a wisdom that transcended the purely material and entered the realm of the mystical and the hidden. Another fascinating example of how women appear in Templar-related art is through architectural motifs. Gothic cathedrals, many of which were funded or built by Templar patrons, often contain symbols and hidden figures that are not immediately apparent to the casual observer. One such motif is the depiction of female figures as guardians of sacred spaces, often in the form of statues, carvings, or frescoes found in the cathedral's entrances, crypts, and chapels. These female figures are sometimes shown holding keys, chalices, or scrolls, symbols associated with esoteric knowledge, divine wisdom, and the protection of sacred relics. In the Cathedral of Chartres in France, one of the most iconic examples of Gothic architecture with strong Templar associations, the stained glass windows feature feminine symbols that appear to be connected to the sacred feminine and to the preservation of esoteric teachings. The windows show the Virgin Mary not as a passive figure, but as an active participant in the divine narrative, one who carries the knowledge and keys to the mysteries of the universe. These depictions challenge the conventional role of women in medieval Christianity, presenting them as bearers of truth and guardians of sacred knowledge. Moreover, The Templars' use of geometry in their buildings, particularly the precise and deliberate placement of symbols, suggests that certain figures, such as women, were not just represented, but were integral to the overall design. Many Templar-related structures, like the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, are filled with hidden messages, and some researchers believe that these cryptic carvings hint at a much larger tradition of sacred geometry and feminine power that was suppressed by the patriarchal church. The concept of the divine feminine also appears frequently in Templar-related iconography, which often contains subtle allusions to ancient deities and archetypes of female power. One striking example of this can be seen in the figure of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of wisdom and magic. Scholars who study the esoteric symbols of the Templars suggest that the Knights may have been influenced by pre-Christian traditions and that the feminine divine was an essential part of their understanding of the world. Isis was often depicted as a powerful figure who held the secrets of the cosmos, knowledge that was passed down through the ages and guarded by those who understood its significance. In Templar symbolism, Isis may have served as an archetype for the women who guarded the sacred knowledge, just as the Templars themselves were seen as protectors of spiritual truths. Similarly, Mary Magdalene has been the subject of much speculation in Templar-related symbolism. Often portrayed as a woman who is deeply connected to the sacred mysteries of Christ, Magdalene represents both the earthly and spiritual dimensions of divine wisdom. In some artistic depictions, she is shown holding a chalice, the same chalice believed by many to be the Holy Grail, connecting her directly to the mystery of the Grail and the bloodline it supposedly represents. Some historians argue that the Templars may have viewed Mary Magdalene as a pivotal figure in their own spiritual journey, and that she served as a symbol of the hidden knowledge they sought to preserve. In certain medieval manuscripts, there are illustrations of women playing central roles in Templar rituals or holding secretive positions within the order. Though these images are not as common as those of the Knights themselves, they reveal the presence of women in the Templar world. Women who were more than just passive figures or supporters of the Knights. They were depicted as women of power, knowledge, and authority, entrusted with the responsibility of guarding sacred relics, preserving hidden teachings, and maintaining the continuity of the Templar bloodlines. These depictions suggest that the role of women within the Templars was far more complex than mainstream history allows. The presence of the sacred feminine in Templar art also extends to the rituals and ceremonies associated with the order. Many of the rites performed by the Templars were deeply rooted in mystical traditions, some of which have been linked to ancient pagan practices that honored the feminine divine. It is possible that some of the Templar initiations and rites involved women as key figures, acting as spiritual leaders or mentors to male knights. The fact that these women's roles were hidden from the official records only adds to the mystery surrounding their involvement. The symbol of the rose and its connection to the sacred feminine in Templar art may also hold the key to understanding the deeper layers of the order's teachings. The rose, often portrayed as a symbol of secrecy and hidden knowledge, represents the flowering of wisdom and the unfolding of divine truth. Women, who have long been associated with both the preservation and transmission of knowledge, are often seen as the bearers of this sacred wisdom in Templar symbolism. Art, architecture, and symbolism all serve as windows into the secret world of the Templars. Through these mediums, the role of women in the order can be traced not as passive figures in the background, but as powerful guardians of spiritual knowledge and sacred truths. These women were integral to the preservation of the Templar legacy, both through the literal guardianship of relics and the metaphorical transmission of wisdom from generation to generation. The hidden messages encoded in Templar art remind us that the feminine, often silenced by history, was deeply embedded in the very foundations of the order and its esoteric teachings. History is often written by those who wield power, and for centuries, the stories of women in positions of influence, especially in the shadowy world of the Templars, have been erased or marginalized. But there are a few who broke through the silence and have become figures of intrigue, their stories weaving through the fabric of Templar lore. These are the lost daughters of the Templars, women whose names may not be widely recognized in mainstream history, yet whose actions and legacies have left an indelible mark on the mysteries of the Order and its ongoing secrets. One of the most captivating aspects of these women is that, while history often relegated them to the background, they were active participants in the survival of the Templar legacy. They were not merely passive figures. They took on leadership roles in families, wielded significant influence within the secretive circles that surrounded the Templars, and helped preserve the sacred knowledge that would eventually give rise to the esoteric movements of later centuries. Through marriage, inheritance, and sheer determination, these women held the keys to many of the Templars' most guarded secrets. One name that frequently surfaces in discussions of the Templar legacy is Blanca de Castilla, the Queen of Castile and a member of the powerful Castilian royal family. While not a Templar in the traditional sense, she was deeply connected to the Order, and her influence within the region was considerable. As the mother of King Alfonso X of Castile, Blanca de Castilla was a pivotal figure during a time of political upheaval in Spain. In addition to her royal duties, she was known for her patronage of the arts, her intellectual pursuits, and her role in shaping the cultural and religious landscape of Spain during the medieval period. Her influence extended beyond politics and culture, as she was deeply involved in the establishment of some of the first Templar-related structures in the Iberian Peninsula. It was under her guidance that several key Templar fortresses were built, and her support helped ensure that the Order's presence remained strong even as the official church turned against the Templars. Blanca's role as a matron of the Order, though not officially recognized, helped preserve Templar interests and pass on important esoteric teachings through her descendants. Her example underscores how the women associated with the Templars were key in ensuring that the Order's knowledge did not vanish after its dissolution. Another fascinating figure in the story of the Templar women is Isabella of Clermont, the daughter of a prominent Templar knight, Hugues de Payens, the first Grand Master of the Templars. Isabella is an enigmatic figure, largely lost to history, but her familial connections are telling. As the daughter of Hugues de Payens, Isabella was born into the heart of Templar power. Her position would have made her not only a direct beneficiary of the Order's wealth and influence, but also a potential guardian of its most secret teachings. Isabella's legacy is closely tied to the Cistercian order, the religious group that was in many ways the spiritual ancestor of the Templars. The Cistercians were known for their strict adherence to monastic discipline and their role in the spread of Templar knowledge across Europe. Through her familial ties, Isabella would have had access to key information and manuscripts that would have been central to the Order's hidden agenda. Though her life was shrouded in mystery, it is believed that Isabella may have played a role in protecting and transmitting Templar knowledge after the Order's official dissolution. Some researchers have posited that she was a secret initiator within the Cistercian tradition, charged with preserving certain aspects of Templar rituals and doctrines. If this is true, then Isabella's role as a keeper of the Templar legacy is one of the most powerful examples of how women became the silent protectors of the Order's esoteric wisdom. Moving from the Iberian Peninsula to the heart of Europe, we encountered Jeanne de Clisson, a remarkable woman whose connection to the Templars lies not in direct membership, but in her involvement in the political and military movements that followed the Order's downfall. Jeanne, often referred to as the Lioness of Brittany, was a widow who became one of the most feared and respected figures of medieval France. After the brutal execution of her husband, she led a relentless campaign of vengeance against the French crown, targeting those she believed were responsible for his death. Her fierce determination and ability to inspire fear in her enemies were qualities that not only marked her as an extraordinary leader, but also as a protector of Templar interests. Jeanne's actions were in many ways a direct response to the weakening of Templar power in France, as the order's influence began to wane. Jean's campaign for justice could be seen as a symbolic reclaiming of Templar values, values rooted in chivalric codes, loyalty, and the protection of sacred knowledge. Through her actions, she became a figure of resistance, much like the Templars themselves had been. Jean's legacy also highlights the unique position that many women found themselves in after the fall of the Templars, forced to navigate a world in which the established powers sought to suppress the very knowledge that had once given the order its strength. In many ways, women like Jean were the stewards of the Templar spirit, fighting not only for personal vengeance, but also for the preservation of a hidden legacy that could not be openly revealed. The story of the Templar women also includes Mary Magdalene, though her connection to the order is far more symbolic and mystical. Mary Magdalene has long been regarded by certain esoteric traditions as the sacred wife of Jesus Christ and the bearer of his bloodline. In the context of the Templars, her story became an essential piece of the puzzle, linking the order to the mythos of the Holy Grail and the sacred feminine. The idea that the Templars were protectors of Mary Magdalene's lineage is a recurring theme in alternative history and esoteric lore. While there is no definitive historical evidence to confirm the Templars' involvement with Mary Magdalene's descendants, her figure represents an enduring symbol of feminine strength, wisdom, and secrecy. The Magdalene narrative, with its themes of hidden knowledge and esoteric power, was passed down through the centuries by various groups, many of whom were directly influenced by the Templars. Women, both in history and legend, have been the carriers of this sacred narrative, ensuring that the stories of the past were not completely lost. These women, Blanca de Castilla, Isabella of Clermont, Jean de Clisson, and Mary Magdalene, represent just a few of the lost daughters of the Templars who played pivotal roles in the survival and transmission of the Order's secrets. Their stories have largely been ignored or obscured by mainstream history, yet their legacies are intricately woven into the tapestry of the Templar narrative. As we uncover their hidden contributions, we begin to see the true power of women within the Templar Order, not just as supporters or passive figures, but as active participants in safeguarding the mysteries that would shape future generations. Their lives and actions offer a glimpse into a much broader and more nuanced story of the Templars, one in which women were not merely footnotes, but key players in the survival of one of history's most enigmatic and powerful organizations. As the trail of the Templars begins to move beyond the familiar battlegrounds of Europe, a quieter, more concealed story emerges, one that takes us into the monasteries, libraries, and hidden enclaves where knowledge was guarded with a devotion equal to any knight's oath. This phase of the narrative shifts attention from the battlefield to the scriptorium, from steel to ink, from crusader banners to the secretive world of Templar scholarship. Here, among manuscripts illuminated by flickering candlelight, we encounter hints of the forgotten women who once stood at the heart of the Order's most guarded intellectual traditions. Their presence, rarely acknowledged in official chronicles, seems to whisper from the margins of parchments, concealed in symbols, signatures, and encoded diagrams that only recently have drawn the interest of historians willing to read between the lines. Tracing the roots of this hidden tradition means journeying back to the early foundations of the Templar network, to a time when the Order relied on far more than swords and fortifications. They relied on information, maps, correspondences, coded messages, and spiritual writings that blended theology with geometry, mysticism with logistics. Yet the keepers of these texts were not always men. Monastic communities of women, often forgotten by mainstream accounts, served as translators, scribes, archivists, and sometimes confidential messengers. Many of these women came from noble families whose alliances protected the Templar cause, and it was precisely their invisibility within the patriarchal structures of the age that made them invaluable. Their work left shadows, altered handwriting styles and manuscripts, notes in feminine Latin, and annotations referencing knowledge of journeys and events they should never have been privy to unless they were involved directly. One of the most intriguing aspects of this textual mystery lies in the manuscripts found in certain Cistercian and Benedictine houses that were closely linked with the Templars. Some bear dedication lines to unnamed sisters, daughters, or handmaidens of the light. At first glance, mainstream historians dismissed these as spiritual metaphors, but closer examination reveals patterns inconsistent with typical religious phrasing. The recurring symbol of the rose intertwined with the sword, a motif later associated with Rosicrucian imagery, appears in the margins of several such manuscripts. Though its true meaning remains debated, some scholars now argue that it may represent a faction or circle of women entrusted with esoteric teachings, particularly related to navigation, herbal medicine, and geometric interpretation of sacred spaces. These women did not merely copy texts. They preserved ideas the Templars feared would be lost in the chaos of crusades and political persecution. In some cases, they may even have expanded upon them. Accounts from the Middle East hint that certain Templars interacted with female scholars, healers, and mystics of Islamic, Jewish, and Eastern Christian traditions. Knowledge exchanged in these encounters appears to have filtered back to Europe through written fragments embedded within manuscripts attributed to anonymous female scribes. The result was a hybrid intellectual tradition, mathematical, mystical, and practical, kept alive by individuals whose lives were never intended to enter official history. Evidence of these women's involvement becomes more compelling when examining the mysterious shadow codices that appear in Templar inventories. Several of these codices list dual authorship, one name belonging to a knight, the other replaced by a blank line or a monogram beginning with the letter M or A. These initials recur in different regions: Occitania, Lombardy, the Rhineland, and even the Iberian Peninsula. The consistency suggests not a coincidence, but a network. Women operating across monastic and noble households, mirroring the Templars' own structure, but hidden beneath layers of secrecy. The deeper one follows this scholarly trail, the more questions arise. Were these women simply scribes and caretakers of knowledge, or did they hold a more active role within the order's most secretive missions? Some interpretations argue that they were initiates of a secondary, parallel tradition, one tasked with safeguarding spiritual and scientific teachings too controversial or valuable to risk in the hands of the order's militant branches. Others believe they may have supervised the creation of certain coded maps and star charts used to guide the Templars' movements across Europe and the Mediterranean. Their handwriting, when compared carefully, suggests a level of education unusual for women of the medieval period. Access to algebraic notation, symbolic geometry, and esoteric commentary that points to a deeper, almost hidden curriculum. Whatever role these women played, their presence in the textual record challenges the mainstream assumption that the Templar order was exclusively male in thought, action, and influence. Their quiet fingerprints across the manuscripts reveal a more complex reality, one in which female intellect and devotion helped shape the spiritual and strategic backbone of one of history's most enigmatic brotherhoods. And yet, even with these tantalizing fragments, the full truth remains obscured, buried in archives, sealed in private collections, or lost to time. As we follow these cryptic clues forward, the mystery shifts again, from illuminated manuscripts to the secret correspondences that linked the Templars with the courts of Europe. And it is within these letters, hidden in codes and ciphers, that the story of the lost daughters begins to take on a new and startling dimension. In the years surrounding the downfall of the Templar order, a subtle but unmistakable shift appears in the historical record, a shift marked not by overt declarations, but by absences, replacements, and sudden interruptions in correspondence. Letters that once flowed steadily between Templar preceptories begin to show irregularities. Ink changes tone mid-sentence, as if a different hand took over. Margins that were once filled with coded annotations suddenly fall silent. Yet in this silence, something faint but remarkable emerges. New hands, new signatures, and new linguistic rhythms, all pointing to the possibility that those who carried the torch of Templar knowledge in its final days were not the men who had been hunted, excommunicated, or imprisoned, but the women hidden within their networks, the so-called daughters who had been trained in secrecy long before the trials began. To understand this transition, one must trace the final decades of the order not through battlefield accounts or legal documents, but through the personal correspondences that passed, often covertly, between noble households and monastic communities. Many of these letters were thought to have vanished after the mass arrests of 1307, yet a number survived, preserved in archives under misidentifications or hidden behind misfiled covers. When analyzed closely, they reveal that several key Templar routes for communication remained active well after the order was officially dismantled. Couriers still traveled between Paris, Aragon, and the Low Countries. Coded messages still circulated, and provisions for certain sisters or trusted daughters continued to appear in estate ledgers belonging to families historically aligned with the Templars. These women, previously glimpsed only in marginalia and manuscript trails, now stepped further into the light as active participants in the final phase of the Order's secret operations. Some appear to have served as intermediaries between Templar fugitives and sympathetic nobles. Others acted as keepers of hidden assets, managing land, relics, or coded inventories that needed protection from confiscation. A few letters even hint at women leading small circles of initiates, preserving rituals and teachings that the persecuted knights could no longer safeguard. What makes their presence especially compelling is not simply the fact that they existed, but that they were trusted with roles of immense responsibility at the moment when the Order's survival hung in the balance. One particularly curious piece of evidence comes from a set of letters discovered in a private collection in southern France. These letters, written in an elegant but hurried Latin, describe the transport of precious documents and vessels of great importance shortly after the arrest began. The writer signs off not with a name, but with the symbol of a crescent nested inside a cross, an unusual motif that scholars have sometimes associated with female monastic circles connected to the Templars. The tone of the letters suggests authority, urgency, and deep familiarity with Templar operations. Whoever this woman was, she was not working on the periphery. She was directing the protection of assets that the Order deemed irreplaceable. Another thread of evidence emerges from Iberia, where the Templars found their strongest enclaves of resistance. Here, letters exchanged between noble women and clerics reveal references to the daughters who journeyed north under the veil of night, and the sisters who carry the star-marked charts. These phrases, though poetic, align closely with the documented nighttime retreats of Templar survivors as they escaped capture. The implication is that certain women not only facilitated these escapes, but also personally guided or accompanied the missions, using knowledge of forest routes, mountain passes, and safe houses across Aragon and Portugal. Perhaps the most intriguing development in this period is the shift in cipher styles. Prior to the trials, Templar messages favored geometric keys or letter substitution grids. But after the arrests, letters begin appearing in a distinctly different style, one resembling the ciphers used in convents for private devotional exchanges or protection of sensitive theological commentary. This blending of Templar and monastic code systems suggests that women trained in convent scriptoria played a significant role in encrypting communications that now carried far more than spiritual reflections. They contained coordinates, inventories, escape plans, and lists of surviving brothers. The more these letters are studied, the clearer the pattern becomes. The Templars' final strategies were not improvised acts of desperation, but carefully organized measures executed through networks that had been cultivated for decades. The women involved were not accidental witnesses, but essential operatives, protected by their relative invisibility within medieval power structures. Their ability to pass unnoticed through noble courts, merchant routes, and monastic corridors gave them an advantage the persecuted knights no longer possessed. As the order crumbled in the eyes of the world, these women ensured that its knowledge, treasures, and perhaps even its spiritual legacy did not vanish with it. Their letters reveal not only logistical coordination, but also a profound emotional and moral resolve. They speak of duty, loyalty, and the heartbreaking awareness that they were carrying the final embers of a tradition that might never reemerge in recognizable form. And yet, from these letters, a question rises like smoke from a long-extinguished torch. What exactly were these women preserving? What knowledge had been entrusted to them that warranted such secrecy, such risk, and such sacrifice? The trail leads forward, not into the courts of Europe, but into the legend-filled realm of hidden journeys, secret guardianship, and the possibility that the Templar legacy survived not through the fugitive knights, but through the forgotten daughters who carried it into the shadows. As the letters and coded messages trail off into obscurity, the narrative shifts from written records to physical pathways, those forgotten routes, pilgrim tracks, and hidden corridors through which the final secrets of the Templars were spirited away. These journeys form one of the most elusive aspects of the Order's collapse, a shadow geography that reveals itself only through fragmented clues. It is here, in the spaces between history and myth, that the mysterious movements of the so-called daughters become impossible to ignore. The routes they traveled were not random flights from danger, but deliberate, orchestrated migrations that appear to have had a singular purpose: to relocate sacred knowledge and relics to places where they could be safeguarded beyond the reach of the crown, the church, and the violent chaos of the early 14th century. These migrations often followed paths that overlapped with pilgrimage trails, allowing the women to move unnoticed among the crowds. Yet the destinations were anything but ordinary. Forest hermitages, abandoned hilltop fortresses, mountain shrines, and remote convents served as their havens. Many of these places, when inspected with modern archaeological methods, reveal anomalous carvings, hidden chambers, or alterations to their original structure, suggesting that they once served a clandestine purpose. It is within these spaces that the daughters temporarily sheltered both themselves and the artifacts entrusted to them by fleeing Templar commanders. One recurring location referenced indirectly through coded letters and monastic inventories is a set of mountain passes in the Pyrenees. These narrow trails, often used by shepherds and smugglers, connect France with Aragon and Navarre. During the Templar trials, several groups of women from noble families disappeared from records in these very regions. Later documents from small convents on the Spanish side of the mountains mention the arrival of guests of the Lily, an enigmatic phrase some historians now believe referred to Templar-linked women seeking refuge. Among the artifacts these guests brought with them were bundles described as containing maps, charts, and a vessel wrapped in iron cloth. While the vessel itself has never been identified, the wording closely resembles descriptions used for items of ritual significance in earlier Templar inventories. From the Pyrenees, the trail extends further into Iberia, where Templar sympathizers remained strong despite the Order's fall. Several families in Portugal and Aragon were known for supporting the Knights covertly, and their estates often acted as hidden waypoints. Letters discovered in the early 20th century refer to the women who traveled with the star maps, implying that these female couriers were responsible not only for transporting documents, but for understanding and interpreting them. Their knowledge of celestial navigation, rare for women of the period, suggests that they had been trained within the Templar intellectual tradition, possibly even initiated into aspects of secret cartographic lore that connected geographical routes with astronomical alignments. Further north, in Occitania, the mystery takes another turn. Oral traditions collected in the 19th century describe a group of white-cloaked sisters who traveled between abandoned Cathar strongholds shortly after the Templar suppression. These accounts claim that the women carried small wooden chests and spoke in a language the locals could not understand, likely a mixture of Latin and encoded phrasing. Though such stories cannot be verified, they echo the known practice of the Templars using Cathar routes and safe houses during the final years before their fall. It is therefore plausible that these women were transporting items connected to a shared spiritual or esoteric heritage that predated both the Cathars and the Templars. Perhaps the most enigmatic destination associated with these women lies in the rugged highlands of Scotland. While much attention has been given to the theory of Templar knights fleeing to Scottish shores, less has been said about the possibility that women linked to the order traveled the same routes. An obscure Scottish chronicle mentions the arrival of foreign maidens bearing the Cross of the Rose. They were given sanctuary in a priory known for its connections to both the Knights of St. John and several Templarized noble families. Local tradition holds that these women brought with them books of the old wisdom and a circle of metal inscribed with stars, although no such objects have ever been found. These stories may contain embellishments, yet they align with Templar efforts to preserve dangerous or forbidden knowledge by dispersing it across regions loyal to their hidden networks. What emerges from these scattered journeys is a pattern of intentional dispersal. The daughters were not fleeing blindly, but following routes pre-established by the order, routes designed for concealment, survival, and the preservation of spiritual treasures. Their movement resembles that of bees carrying fragments of their hive to new locations, ensuring the continuity of a lineage when the original home has been destroyed. This raises a compelling question. If the knights were the visible symbol of the Templar legacy, were the women its hidden continuity? Whether they carried relics, manuscripts, encoded star charts, or simply the memory of rituals passed down in secret, these journeys were acts of profound fidelity. Each trail represents a decision, a choice to protect something whose significance outweighed their own safety. And although these women vanished from official history shortly after their travels, the paths they walked would become the silent arteries of a legacy that refused to die. The more one follows these routes, the more a tantalizing possibility emerges, that the knowledge they carried did not vanish into the mountains or halls of forgotten convents, but instead seeded new traditions, new societies, and new symbols that would resurface centuries later under different names. As the trails of the daughters stretch outward across Europe, the fragments of their story begin to point towards something deeper, a hidden network of guardianship, ritual, and spiritual authority that long predated the Templars and would continue long after them. By this stage of the investigation, the narrative begins weaving the hardest-to-grasp threads. The secret rituals whispered through encoded manuscripts, the symbolic transmissions passed from woman to woman in private circles, and the possibility that these women were not simply couriers of objects, but bearers of a lineage intentionally kept outside the official structures of the Church. It is here, in the overlapping twilight between recorded history and esoteric tradition, that the daughters begin to resemble a clandestine priestly class, custodians of knowledge the Templars could not openly claim, but relied upon nevertheless. Many of the clues arise from ritual texts once dismissed as apocryphal or fanciful. Among them are fragments found in old convent libraries, hymns, meditations, and ceremonial instructions that diverge subtly from mainstream Christian liturgy. Some describe rituals conducted under the new moon, invoking concepts of the hidden light, the star-born wisdom, and the vessel of the mother. These writings were long labeled as harmless contemplative poetry, but their imagery aligns strikingly with symbols found in certain Templar chapels. The eight-pointed star, the rose entwined with the sword, and geometric floor patterns that appear to encode lunar cycles. The parallels suggest shared doctrinal roots, or, at the very least, the existence of a silent exchange of mystical teachings between these women and the knights who relied on them. Another layer of mystery emerges from the oral traditions preserved in rural communities across France and Iberia. Stories collected over generations speak of secret gatherings held by small groups of women referred to as the Silent Sisters, the Keepers, or the White Daughters. These gatherings reportedly took place in secluded forests or abandoned towers, locations consistent with earlier accounts of hidden Templar movement. The rituals described in these tales center around the transmission of symbolic objects, rings with star engravings, tablets marked with circles, or small reliquaries said to contain light seeds. While folklore often embellishes truth, the consistency of these stories across regions hints an underlying historical practice, one that valued female continuity, secrecy, and spiritual protection. In several surviving manuscripts attributed to noble women with known Templar allegiances, one finds references to a mysterious Circle of the Dawn, a term thought to describe a closed group of women tasked with guarding specific teachings related to cosmology, healing, and sacred geometry. The manuscripts mention rites of initiation involving a symbolic journey through darkness before receiving a mark of light on the wrist or shoulder. Though no physical evidence of such marking survives, the imagery corresponds to certain carvings found in remote hermitages where Templar fugitives are believed to have taken refuge. These carvings, featuring spirals intersecting with star patterns, suggest a symbolic language designed to be understood by those trained in the order's esoteric cosmology. The question that arises from these fragments is both compelling and unsettling. Were these women simply supportive figures operating on the fringes of a male-led order, or were they part of an independent spiritual tradition that the Templars themselves secretly revered? Some scholars have proposed that the daughters may have represented a continuation of pre-Christian priestess traditions, lineages that preserved esoteric knowledge passed down from Celtic, Gnostic, or Eastern mystical sources. The Templars, with their syncretic spirituality and fascination with ancient wisdom, may have recognized in these women custodians of mysteries the Church sought to suppress. In this view, the women were not auxiliaries, but equals, partners in a hidden spiritual collaboration operating beneath the surface of medieval society. Further evidence supporting this idea appears in several ritual diagrams discovered in the archives of a former Templar estate in Burgundy. These diagrams depict concentric circles labeled with cryptic inscriptions referencing the breath, the vessel, and the heart of the star. The placement of the inscriptions suggests a ritual layout involving multiple participants, some of whom are referred to as the Daughters of the Inner Path. The diagram's precision and symbolic density indicate a tradition of advanced esoteric training, one that included astronomy, numerology, and contemplative practices not typically associated with medieval women. The diagrams also imply that these women were integral to rituals designed to invoke divine protection, guide spiritual journeys, or interpret celestial signs during times of crisis. This leads to the possibility that the migrations of the daughters were not merely logistical operations, but sacred acts of preservation. By carrying relics, maps, and coded manuscripts to remote sanctuaries, they were not only protecting objects, they were maintaining the integrity of rituals and teachings that needed to remain unbroken. Their journeys become a form of pilgrimage within a hidden spiritual calendar, aligning their movements with lunar phases, equinoxes, or celestial conjunctions known only to those initiated into the deeper mysteries of the order. Perhaps the most enigmatic aspect of these women's ritual role concerns their connection to healing practices. Several monastic accounts reference women skilled in the restorative arts who arrived in times of war or plague, offering remedies described as unusual or foreign. Their knowledge of herbal combinations, pressure techniques, and symbolic incantations suggests a tradition blending practical medicine with mystical elements. The Templars, who encountered advanced medical cultures in the Middle East, may have entrusted these women with healing practices too controversial or misunderstood to be shared within ordinary society. If true, this would explain why some rituals linked to the daughters emphasize cleansing, renewal, and the consecration of sacred water, symbols often associated with healing lineages in ancient traditions. Taken together, the scattered ritual fragments paint a portrait of a hidden network of spiritually trained women who operated alongside the Templars, but outside the visibility of church authority. Their practices, teachings, and symbolic transmissions form a silent thread that runs parallel to the more visible narrative of battles, crusades, and political intrigue. While official history may dismiss these tales as speculation, the subtle consistency among texts, symbols, and oral traditions cannot be ignored. At this point in the story, a new question emerges with profound implications. If these women preserved a secret spiritual lineage during the Templars' fall, what form did that lineage take in the centuries that followed? And how might it have resurfaced, disguised, and reinterpreted in the esoteric societies that later shaped Europe's mystical underground? As the centuries passed, the story of the daughters began to fade into the mists of legend. Yet, the mysteries they carried were not entirely lost. The hidden knowledge, the rituals, the symbols, they would re-emerge in strange and unexpected places buried beneath the surface of time, reinterpreted by secret societies and slowly woven back into the fabric of history. The gradual resurfacing of these ancient symbols and practices has been one of the most enigmatic aspects of esoteric history. Across Europe, particularly in the shadows of the Renaissance and beyond, we begin to see a slow but unmistakable reawakening of the themes and mysteries that the daughters once preserved. These reappearances are not always direct, but rather they are often wrapped in symbolism, encoded language, and mysterious rituals, giving birth to new forms of spiritual and philosophical movements. Movements that seem to bear the fingerprints of the Templars and their hidden female counterparts. The first major manifestation of these resurfacing mysteries occurred during the Renaissance, when Europe was experiencing a cultural and intellectual revival. The rediscovery of classical knowledge from Greece, Egypt, and the Near East brought about a reinvigoration of esoteric thought. But it was not only the classical texts that were being rediscovered. It was also the more hidden, occult knowledge that had been suppressed by the Church and other authorities. Secret societies like the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and other occult fraternities began to emerge, bringing with them symbols, rituals, and teachings that seemed to trace their roots back to much older, pre-Christian traditions. These groups, many of which were initially formed by intellectuals and nobility, often incorporated symbols that were strikingly similar to those used by the Templars, such as the compass and square, the pentagram, the cross, and the rose. What is particularly compelling is that many of these symbols, when traced back through history, appear to have been connected not just to the Templars, but to the very same sacred knowledge and esoteric practices that the daughters carried with them. These groups, though male-dominated on the surface, often included women in their ranks, some as high-ranking members, and others as integral behind-the-scenes figures, much like the daughters of the Templars. In fact, certain rituals and symbols used by these secret societies seem to align with the hidden spiritual practices that these women were believed to have guarded, such as the use of sacred geometry, cosmic symbolism, and alchemical transformation. The rise of the Rosicrucian movement in the early 17th century is one of the most significant examples of this rebirth. The Rosicrucians, who were thought to possess secret knowledge of alchemy, Hermeticism, and mysticism, were directly influenced by the ancient and medieval spiritual traditions that the Templars had preserved. Many Rosicrucian texts, such as the Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio Fraternitatis, include veiled references to the mysteries of the sacred feminine and the preservation of hidden wisdom. These references are often cryptic, but appear to echo the very same themes found in the teachings associated with the daughters of the Templars. Mystical knowledge that transcended the boundaries of gender and had been hidden away for centuries. Similarly, Freemasonry, which emerged more formally in the late 17th and 18th centuries, adopted many of the symbols and ideas associated with the Templars, often with a hidden layer of esoteric meaning that only initiates could truly understand. The role of women in Freemasonry, though traditionally secondary, began to evolve in the late 19th and 20th centuries with the formation of female lodges and the inclusion of women in the higher echelons of Masonic orders, such as the Order of the Eastern Star. These organizations continued the legacy of hidden spiritual knowledge, and their rituals and symbols often hint at the same sacred mysteries that the Templars and their daughters had once protected. The symbolism of the rose, for example, which was central to both the Templars and later esoteric societies, became particularly significant in these movements. The rose was not only a symbol of spiritual awakening and divine beauty, but also one of resurrection and hidden truth, a fitting symbol for the daughters, who were the guardians of knowledge thought to be lost forever. In the case of the Rosicrucians, the rosy cross became the central motif, representing the blending of the masculine and feminine principles, as well as the union of the material and spiritual worlds. This symbolic resurrection of the rose can be seen as a direct link to the daughters' role in preserving Templar wisdom in secret. Perhaps one of the most compelling connections between the daughters and later secret societies lies in the emergence of alchemical symbolism, which flourished during the Renaissance and the early modern period. Alchemy, the ancient practice of transformation, was deeply linked to the spiritual quests of both the Templars and the mystical traditions they guarded. The daughters, as keepers of sacred wisdom, may have been involved in preserving the alchemical traditions that would later resurface in the writings of figures like Paracelsus and Isaac Newton. Alchemical symbols, such as the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail, the philosopher's stone, and the transformation of base metals into gold, represent the idea of spiritual and material regeneration. Ideas that were not only central to Templar thought, but were also encoded in the practices of later esoteric societies. The most direct link between the daughters and the later resurgence of these esoteric ideas is the concept of the sacred feminine. Throughout history, the feminine has often been relegated to the periphery of spiritual traditions, yet the daughters were believed to have preserved a direct connection to this powerful and ancient aspect of spirituality. In the mystical traditions that follow the Templars, we see a slow but consistent reassertion of the feminine as a central sacred force, whether in the form of the Black Madonna in Catholic and Gnostic traditions, the feminine deity in alchemical texts, or the role of the feminine in Freemasonry and other secret societies. The idea of a hidden, divine feminine energy, once suppressed, became a key element of the mystical and occult revival during the Renaissance and beyond. It is not just the symbols and rituals that have resurfaced over time, but also the very idea that the daughters were more than just passive participants in the Templar legacy. They were active, powerful figures, deeply involved in the preservation and transmission of sacred knowledge. As time moved forward, the spiritual communities that emerged from the ashes of the Templar Order would unknowingly carry forward the torch that these women had once held, hiding their knowledge in plain sight, protected by layers of symbolism, ritual, and secrecy. Ultimately, the reemergence of these hidden spiritual practices during the Renaissance and beyond highlights the resilience of the daughters' legacy. Despite centuries of suppression, their influence can be seen in the very fabric of later esoteric movements that carried forward the mysteries of the Templars, the sacred feminine, and the hidden knowledge once guarded by these extraordinary women. Their story, though veiled in shadow, continues to illuminate the path for those willing to look beyond the surface of history and explore the depths of what has been preserved. As the centuries continue to unfold, the legacy of the Daughters of the Templars remains deeply entwined with the more hidden aspects of modern-day, esoteric, and occult traditions. These women, despite their absence from mainstream history, have left behind traces of their spiritual teachings that continue to resonate in the contemporary world. Though much of their true role remains obscured, it is possible to see how their legacy has influenced modern spiritual movements, alternative histories, and even contemporary conspiracy theories. Their hidden influence is perhaps most palpable in the rise of New Age spirituality, modern Gnosticism, and the exploration of sacred feminine principles. These modern movements seem to echo the very same mysteries and practices that the Daughters may have once safeguarded, suggesting that the threads of ancient wisdom they carried have not entirely been lost to time. New Age spirituality, with its emphasis on personal transformation, mystical knowledge, and the divine feminine, seems to be the modern manifestation of the very teachings that the Daughters might have protected. Practices such as astrology, energy healing, crystal work, and even the study of sacred geometry all trace their roots to ancient traditions, many of which the Templars themselves were thought to have been exposed to during their travels in the Holy Land. Yet, it is the feminine-centered aspects of these traditions, those that emphasize the power of intuition, the importance of nurturing, and the connection between the earth and the cosmos, that seem to directly mirror the teachings that the Daughters may have preserved. The resurgence of the goddess archetype in modern spirituality is one of the clearest indicators of this hidden influence. Across cultures, the divine feminine has been recognized and revered as a powerful and transformative force. In many ways, the stories of the Daughters parallel the reemergence of this sacred feminine in the modern world. Just as the Daughters once protected the sacred wisdom of the Templars, contemporary spiritual movements are reawakening ancient teachings about the goddess, the lunar cycles, and the primordial forces of nature. These ideas were once suppressed or marginalized by the dominant patriarchal structures of society, but are now being embraced by a new generation seeking to reclaim lost knowledge. The influence of the Daughters can also be seen in the growing interest in mysticism, alternative histories, and conspiratorial narratives that question the official story of human history. In these realms, the Templars and their hidden networks, including the Daughters, are often cast as the keepers of secret knowledge, protectors of ancient truths, and defenders of spiritual wisdom. From the proliferation of books, documentaries, and internet forums dedicated to uncovering the real history of the Templars, to the rise of societies that claim to be their modern-day heirs, the Daughters' legacy seems to echo in the hidden corners of the world. They are presented as the shadowy figures who continue to influence global events, their secret knowledge sought by those in power, as well as by those who believe that ancient truths are being deliberately concealed. One of the most intriguing aspects of these contemporary conspiratorial narratives is the connection between the Templars, the Daughters, and the secret societies that followed in their wake. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and other esoteric orders have long been associated with the Templars, and many of these groups claim to carry forward the hidden wisdom of the medieval knights. However, less attention has been paid to the role that women may have played in these societies. It is possible that the Daughters, or the traditions they carried, were quietly absorbed into the rituals and teachings of these later orders, continuing their work in secret. In Freemasonry, for example, the emphasis on symbols such as the compass, the square, and the all-seeing eye can be traced back to Templar symbology, which was itself linked to ancient mystical and alchemical traditions. Although Freemasonry was historically a male-dominated institution, the inclusion of women in certain Masonic orders, such as the Order of the Eastern Star, reflects a growing recognition of the importance of the feminine in esoteric teachings. The rituals and symbols of these orders often speak of balance, unity, and the integration of masculine and feminine principles, ideas that would have been central to the spiritual legacy of the Daughters. Moreover, The resurgence of interest in the sacred feminine in modern spiritual and mystical movements cannot be overlooked. From the rise of feminism to the exploration of goddess spirituality, there's been a renewed focus on honoring the feminine divine. This shift in consciousness, some argue, is the natural unfolding of the ancient wisdom that the daughters carried with them. In this sense, the daughter's story is not just one of the past, but a living, breathing legacy that continues to shape the way we understand gender, power, and spirituality in the modern world. The return to the goddess, to the moon, to the elements, to the cyclical rhythms of nature. These are all markers of a spiritual rebirth that, in many ways, echoes the work of the daughters. The exploration of hidden knowledge in contemporary society has also opened new avenues for the re-examination of ancient texts and symbols. While mainstream historical narratives have often sidelined the contributions of women in spiritual and intellectual circles, modern researchers, historians, and esoteric scholars are increasingly recognizing the significance of female spiritual leaders in shaping the course of history. The rediscovery of forgotten manuscripts, ritual texts, and sacred artifacts, some of which may have been passed down by the daughters, has spurred a renewed interest in the role of women as spiritual guardians. This includes the examination of documents that reference female mystics, seers, and healers who might have been the inheritors of Templar wisdom, such as the manuscripts found in the private libraries of influential female figures in history. The growing interest in alternative history and the search for hidden truths is also connected to the daughter's legacy. As people become more aware of the inconsistencies and gaps in the official historical narrative, many are turning to alternative sources of knowledge, seeking out secret archives, forgotten relics, and lost manuscripts that may shed light on the mysteries of the past. The daughter's story fits perfectly into this modern quest for hidden knowledge, as they represent a key piece of the puzzle in understanding the true legacy of the Templars and their esoteric wisdom. As the world continues to search for meaning beyond the surface of official history, the story of the daughters will likely continue to captivate the imagination. Their role in the Templar Order and their preservation of sacred knowledge can be seen as a vital thread in the larger tapestry of spiritual and mystical traditions. By re-examining their story, we not only uncover the hidden history of the Templars, but we also begin to reconnect with the deeper, more spiritual currents of human existence, currents that transcend time, place, and gender. The daughter's legacy, though concealed for centuries, has never fully disappeared. It lives on in the quiet corners of modern spirituality, in the resurgence of the sacred feminine, and in the continuing quest for hidden knowledge that defines so much of our time. As we approach the final section of this exploration, we must pause to reflect on the broader implications of the daughter's legacy and what it means for our understanding of history, spirituality, and hidden knowledge. The story of these women, often relegated to the margins of traditional historical narratives, offers us a powerful reminder of the vast, unseen forces that have shaped our world. Their role as guardians of ancient wisdom, their preservation of secret rituals, and their silent resistance to the overwhelming tides of patriarchy and ecclesiastical control reveal a deeper, often concealed aspect of human history, one that continues to resonate with modern seekers of truth. In a contemporary world where global events, societal structures, and spiritual beliefs are constantly evolving, the story of the daughters offers us an important lesson. It is a lesson in the resilience of hidden knowledge, the power of the feminine in both spiritual and intellectual domains, and the enduring quest for truth in the face of suppression. The daughters, though largely absent from the official history books, were part of a larger spiritual network that spanned centuries and crossed geographical boundaries. They were not mere shadows in the background of history. They were active, dynamic participants in the preservation of wisdom that transcended time and space. In this sense, their legacy is not just one of the past, but of the present and the future. By uncovering the fragments of their story, we are reminded of the ways in which hidden knowledge can be suppressed, distorted, or lost entirely. But we are also reminded that such knowledge, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing. The daughter's wisdom, protected by cryptic symbols, sacred rites, and secret transmissions, has continued to influence esoteric traditions, secret societies, and spiritual movements for centuries. From the Rosicrucians and Freemasons to modern-day New Age spiritualists and occult practitioners, their influence is palpable, woven into the very fabric of contemporary esoteric thought. As we examine the modern implications of their legacy, we begin to see the full scope of their impact. The resurgence of interest in the sacred feminine, the growing recognition of the importance of intuitive and mystical knowledge, and the re-examination of the role of women in spiritual traditions. All of these developments are part of a larger cultural shift. This shift is, in many ways, the return of the daughter's wisdom, now reinterpreted and embraced by a new generation that seeks to uncover what has been hidden for so long. Moreover, the daughter's connection to the Templars, a connection that transcends time and place, reminds us of the importance of spiritual communities that exist outside the mainstream. These communities, whether in the form of secret societies, occult movements, or modern spiritual groups, continue to play a vital role in preserving and transmitting knowledge that is too dangerous, too powerful, or too controversial to be embraced by conventional institutions. The daughters' role as secret keepers of esoteric wisdom underscores the fact that true spiritual knowledge often resides in the margins, outside the control of the institutions that seek to suppress it. In examining the hidden legacy of the daughters, we are also faced with questions about our own relationship to knowledge and power. Who gets to decide what is remembered and what is forgotten? What happens when history is written by those who seek to control the narrative? The daughter's story offers a challenge to conventional historical paradigms. It invites us to reconsider the ways in which power structures influence our understanding of the past and, by extension, our understanding of the present. By shining a light on the often forgotten contributions of these women, we open up new possibilities for how we might approach history and spirituality going forward. Perhaps the most important takeaway from this investigation is the idea of reclamation. The daughters of the Templars were not merely passive figures in history. They were active agents, protectors, and transmitters of knowledge. In uncovering their story, we reclaim a part of history that has been hidden, ignored, or suppressed for centuries. By re-examining their lives and their work, we can begin to reclaim the wisdom they preserved and understand its relevance in our modern context. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not a static, unchanging narrative but a living, breathing thing, one that can be rewritten, reinterpreted, and brought back to life through the efforts of those who are willing to look beyond the surface and seek out what has been concealed. As we look to the future, the story of the daughters remains relevant. In a world that is increasingly grappling with questions of power, gender, and spiritual meaning, their legacy offers us both a challenge and an inspiration. It challenges us to question the historical narratives that have shaped our understanding of the past, to recognize the untold contributions of women in spiritual and intellectual spheres, and to seek out the hidden knowledge that has been passed down through the ages. It also inspires us to reclaim the wisdom of the past, to honor the traditions that have been suppressed or forgotten, and to create a more inclusive, more enlightened world for future generations. Ultimately, the story of the Daughters of the Templars is not just a historical inquiry. It is a call to action. It is a reminder that the search for hidden knowledge is an ongoing journey, one that requires us to challenge the status quo, to embrace the mysteries of the universe, and to honor the sacred feminine that exists within all of us. As we continue this journey, we carry forward the torch that these women once held, an enduring flame of wisdom, resilience, and spiritual power that has survived the centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. And in this rediscovery, we not only honor the daughters, but also open the door to a deeper, more profound understanding of ourselves and the world around us.